and we can continue the discussion. You're fully welcome to keep knowing your breath. And yeah, our whole conversation this evening, again, will be, Nisabho and I will be exploring this, what it means to be generous with one's time. We'll be exploring this theme for the next 25 minutes or so, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. So yeah, appreciate it and enjoy the time in any way that you find most useful. So yeah, Nisabho, I thought this was kind of an interesting subject, because this phrase, you should be generous with your time, or find ways to be generous with your time, is a phrase which you hear quite a bit at monasteries. I mean, maybe it's because one reason is because we're monks and we don't have stuff. Like, we can't be generous with our stuff because we don't have any. But that's one thing we can do. So being generous with your time. So it's kind of almost a trope, or this thing which you hear, and it's not really examined what it means to be generous with your time. And I've kind of taken it in the past as this encouragement that anybody who comes up to you, if someone is making a bid for connection or a bid for affection, then the right thing to do there, one who is really practicing generosity, is how I had taken the implication of this to be. One who's really generous will just, drop whatever they're doing and just, give themselves to whoever comes up to one. And there's that way of being generous with their time, but there's also, what about being generous with your time to yourself? Like, if you have plans to be, doing something wholesome, or if you do have something important going on, or if you have, being generous with your time to the Dhamma. I had plans to study the discourses, and someone's making a kind of a, weak bid for connection or attention or affection or something. And how do you weigh these two things? What does it mean to be generous with one's time? So that's why I thought it would be kind of interesting to examine, because a small little perception like that can have influences, does have an effect on how we spend our time and how we spend our attention. So what are your thoughts? Have you ever thought about this phrase in this way? You must have heard it before.
Yeah, and I think we've discussed it too, Ajahn. It was a great idea for a topic, because it's one that gets said a lot, but you're right. It exists in tension to a lot of, it's not a simple arithmetic, with when do you pull back and when do you give that time. I guess I could go into some preliminary thoughts, although I'm very curious about your musings on it. I think, it is hard, because when we give our time to the practice, it's not very visible, and it's an ineffable thing in some sense that we're lending it to. And, by the metric of the world, pulling back from an interaction or a dinner party or volunteer work, whatever, for the sake of, going back to your room and meditating or studying, frequently really is looked at as a selfish thing. I know we've encountered that, or even, going into robes. And I think it's a constant difficulty to try to explain to people why, say, I think that this holy life is personally a gift that I can give to people, even though it includes a lot of seclusion. And I think a lot of it comes just from seeing the fruits of practice in someone and the ripples that sends out. And I think it's, a lot of people just haven't had a chance to encounter that example. So for me, having had the chance to cross paths with beings like Longpa Pasano, Ajahn Suchito, or these, amazing Ajahns in Thailand and elsewhere, shows you what unbelievable ripples someone who's cultivated their heart to a level of purity can have. I mean, I know people who have encountered, even just once for one day or one brief period, someone like that. And if they're ready, then it can change their whole trajectory. Um, and you don't arrive at that sort of purity without solitude and practice. So, but it's very hard to justify. And I think that was a lot of why the Buddha, constantly said, you know, there's discourses where I think there's a monk named Radha who's questioning the Buddha about, what's the purpose of, this aspect of the path and that aspect of the path. And finally, they arrive at Nibbana, and Radha says, what's the purpose of Nibbana? And the Buddha says, you have not grasped the realm of questioning. The holy life is lived with Nibbana as its ground, as its purpose. It's beyond the realm. And somehow the path holding up as supreme, this thing which doesn't need societal, validation to be deeply valuable. And just, going to a monastery, say during winter retreat at a Abhayagiri, I mean, the monks are all practicing in silence many hours a day. And on the surface, it's not like the rest of the year when they're receiving guests and giving teachings. And yet that's when much of the most powerful work is getting done. So yeah, just to value that time alone and what the practice provides seems essential if you're going to be able to come to some sort of balance. Because otherwise, you're right, how can you justify going into robes or pulling back from a relationship unless you realize that you're actually cultivating something very beautiful as a gift? So yeah, what are your thoughts, Ajahn? I have some more, but I would love to hear what you think.
Yeah, just to respond to your thoughts there about meeting these special people. And you meet, I was talking with this person who was I think a Hindu practitioner, and they were talking about meeting one of their gurus, and was just saying, yeah, when you enter into their presence, they're just fully with you. It's like they fully give all of their time and attention to you. And I've felt that before, and it can kind of give an impression that that's all they've been doing. That's like their whole practice is. In fact, the person who was telling me this story was saying, yeah, that is their whole practice, is just constantly giving their time to other people. And that one, it's kind of hard to believe. Like, even the Buddha, there are places in the Pali Canon where when the Buddha was on alms, say Bhaddiya, the monk who famously came to the Buddha on alms round, and he was very spiritually mature, and the Buddha gave him a very high teaching, but he came to the Buddha on alms round and kind of asked for the teaching right away. And the Buddha's like, it's not the time. Now's not the time. I'm on alms round. And then Bhaddiya just asked for made the request 3 times, and eventually the Buddha says, yeah, in the seen, know just the seen. In the heard, know just the heard. In the cognized, know just the cognized. And with that, basically being as it is, teaching Bhaddiya, realize the path. But there you see the instance of the Buddha saying, no, there's a time and a place for different things. It's not that even the Buddha, wasn't saying that he would just drop, everything for anybody, anytime. And like with these great teachers, I mean, it's not the case that they're always receiving people. When it's their time to receive people, yeah, they fully give themselves to the moment. You come to Abhayagiri and you meet Ajahn Pasano at tea time. The tea time is from 5:30 to 6:30 or 7. And yeah, Lumpur Pasano is amazing. He fully gives himself 100%, 150% to anyone's questions. But at the same time, you don't see, he spent the whole afternoon by himself. And, he spent, years on retreat, before he became an abbot, before he became a teacher, he was spending lots of time alone. So I think it's like you're saying, it's like a hidden, the hidden cost, or the hidden, wood shedding, or basically like the time spent working on one's craft is behind the scenes. And you don't see that when you just meet somebody and say, oh, they totally know timelessness and fully give themselves to everything. There's there's something behind that which is more in a personal mode, like you're intimating.
Yeah, and I mean, it was lucky for the Bahi on that case, because I think he got killed by a cow in the next moment, if I'm not mistaken.
Fairly soon.
So yeah, that was a good call. But I think, it's interesting you bringing this up, Ajahn, because, how do you find that metric? And that Dhammapada verse of, you'll know it well, and you'll know the Pali probably, of the mindful are what, never die, and the mindless, those without mindfulness are as if dead already. What's the Pali, Ajahn?
So appamado amatapadang, pamado machuno padang, appamata namiyanti, ye pamata yatamata. Dhammapada 21.
Ajahn can do that with every Dhammapada verse, more or less, just so people know.
Not anymore. I used to be able to, but
well, but that verse is really important to me, because this Buddhist term we have of sankhara, which is variously translated as volitional formation, or Ajahn Sucitto translated as program. And these programs, as the years go by, in young children, you can see the chitta, the sort of mind heart shine very easily in many. But with a lot of people, you do see how over the years the sankhara just pile on your sort of programs and personality ruts and habits, until by the time someone's 30 or 40, if there's no practice or mindfulness there, it's very hard to see the spark anymore, because it's buried under so many programs. And in a sense, when you interact with someone's sankhara, if it's just idle chatter, or even a mindless interaction, you aren't really interacting with anything. It's two automatons, two sets of sankharas just bouncing off one another with no real impact or place for free will, in a sense. I mean, that's a troublesome term in Buddhist terminology, but I remember Ajahn Amro talking about how much to interact with the world and how much to practice, and he compared it to sharpening a knife. And if you have the angle too sharp, if you're too much in contact with the world, it kind of breaks the edge. But if it's too shallow, if you're sort of always in seclusion, then the knife never gets sharp. So to sharpen wisdom, you need to get just that right angle. And that seems like a good metric. Like, if you're able to approach an interaction with mindfulness and use it as a source of wisdom, and not just be reactive, but be responsive, and then you're actually interacting. Whereas if you're haven't gotten that time alone to meditate, and you're drawn into an interaction, but it's a mindless one, then there's not really an interaction there. You're just interacting with the hall of mirrors of your own projections, and there's no real life in it. So you're not really being generous at all, and you're not interacting, actually.
You don't have anything to give, because you're kind of hollow in yourself.
You're just mechanisms at that point. Yeah. Go on, Ajahn. What are your thoughts?
Oh, no, that's a really good point. Yeah. Even if you're giving your time, in the sense of like giving your body, like your body's there, your ears are there, but you've just got your own trail of your own thought processes, not really able to listen or just be in the moment, then yeah, it's kind of a shoddy gift. So yeah, how do you like develop within yourself something which is worthy of sharing? It's good reflection.
Do you have any other thoughts on that, Ajahn? Or
yeah, I came across this cool T.S. Eliot quote actually in a Lumpur Sumedho talk, which is, "The point of intersection of the timeless with time is the occupation of the saint." And I thought that was beautiful, because there is places for both, in a Buddhist context. The second quality of the Dhamma in the traditional chant is swakato akaliko. So the Dhamma is timeless. So the Dhamma is timeless in the sense that it can be accessed anytime, right here, right now. But it's also, as we're exploring in these talks that we're giving on the Dhammanyu Sutta, the different types of intelligence. One of them is kalanyu, so being intelligent about time, having temporal intelligence. So that's also an aspect of the path, knowing how to how to organize your day, and being able to, kind of weave this or stay on this balance, this razor edge of knowing time. I've got a calendar. Even for monks, even the simplest monks, the calendar item every day is going on alms round. And even if your only calendar item is to go into a village to receive some food and then to eat it, still, you have to know how to experience and know timelessness as with every step. So what do you think? Have you heard that quote before? I thought it's...
Yeah, from the Four Quartets, which is an unbelievably Buddhist poem. I mean, T.S. Eliot had some exposure to Buddhist thought, and it's a beautiful poem.
Cool.
Yeah, and in Christianity, they have those terms as well. Kairos is the timeless time, and Chronos is time-bound time. And I mean, that's essentially is what we're talking about with, if everything's Sankhara, it's just time. It's all Chronos. It's all patterning and conditioning. To bring Kairos into things, to sort of bring that intersection of the timeless Dhamma, there has to be mindfulness. And I think that, I'm struck by this talk I heard Ajahn Sucitto, Longpo Sucitto give, where he spoke about after a few years in robes for him, he didn't think of terms of time anymore. It was just the quality of the chitta, of the mind heart. And that's how he measured everything. And that seems like a relevant reflection. What are we, because that is what changes, I mean, usually we measure our lives on these XY axes with ups and downs, but as soon as Dhamma enters, it's like adding a Z axis, and you're suddenly moving through this whole other trajectory that's very hard to see. But that seems relevant. But at the same time, like all these sort of transcendent recollections, I think it is good to bring it back down to the pragmatic as well. Like you were saying, like, what do you do every day? And on that note, you do need ways of sort of protecting yourself from time drains. And if you're going to practice well, and that can mean letting go of relationships. And Ajahn Jayasaro, I remember when we were talking to him, Ajahn, he mentioned how he had these skillful means of sort of protecting his time. So I think because he doesn't have the sort of heart to say no to people all the time, and neither do I, but he'd instituted these sort of skillful means of boundaries. So I think he had a certain number of days that he was willing to spend outside of his hermitage. But as soon as he reached that limit in terms of a planned year, then he just would tell people requesting him to come visit that, I'm sorry, I have this rule. It's a limit. I can't go. And for someone like me who, it's hard to say no to people. It's really helpful to have these structures, like say at 7 p.m., I'm sorry, I go meditate. And if it helps to like tell a teacher that, then you can tell your friends, I'm sorry, I've told my teacher's instructed me. My doctor's told me. The Buddha's compared to a doctor. Maybe use that one carefully. Ajahn Jeff recommended that, but that I need to go back. My teachers told me to meditate at 7 p.m. And these are skillful ways of kind of protecting your time. And just the final recollection is, in the 6 objects of reverence the Buddha gives, he talks about reverence for the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha, training, and heedfulness. And then the 6th one he adds, I think, to really keep the practitioners from getting too internally focused. The 6th one he adds is respect for hospitality, for receiving guests. And you look through our Vinaya, and there's just pages of commentaries on exactly how you receive a guest, what you do for them, how you set out water for their feet, how you serve. So it seems like the Buddha was aware that some practitioners tend to pull in too much, and he put this very clear marker, like you need to be willing to give yourself also externally. What are your thoughts, Ajahn?
Yeah, those are some good skillful means and very good reflections. Yeah, the Buddha highly praised respecting this quality of hospitality. And I think another skillful means, which I think especially for lay people, is especially maybe if you're living in a city or somewhere where you're maybe being, you're meeting people who are asking for money, or people who are, making these requests on a regular basis. And one, I think, skillful means is to put some forethought. So this evening, why not spend 15 minutes, half an hour, 5 minutes to really think about 3 things, like who you're going to give to, how you're going to give, and where. And some people might say, oh, if I do that, it's too formulaic and it doesn't allow for enough spontaneity. But just because you have put some thought into these questions and giving some parameters to your, who you're giving, how you're giving, and where you're giving, it doesn't mean that you can't be spontaneous within that, or even over and above that. So say you set a limit. Okay, I'm only going to give food, and I'm only going to give, or I'm only going to give a certain amount of money, and I only give it to these organizations. I only give a certain amount of money to these organizations each month. And then if another organization or another person comes up to you after that limit, you can say, I'm really sorry. I do, want to support, but I've already, I've reached this limit that I've set. And I think that's reasonable enough. It's generosity is thoroughly to be praised, and it really does lead to happiness. But anybody who's, kind of their generosity has been tested in a negative way, you can, generosity does, come to a place when you start, feeling weird about it, feeling imposed upon. I know my grandma, incredibly generous person. She, once mentioned to me at the end of the year, she was doing taxes or something, and said, this year looking through the taxes, it looks like I gave to 70 different organizations, and would just give to basically anybody who would ask. But, staying with her when, she would get, 5 new letters in the mail each day, different organizations asking for money. And it's like, she's a really generous person, but everybody's got limits, and it sucks, to, if you don't have a clear limit that you've set for yourself, you can just feel like you're being hard-hearted and ungenerous. Finding this balance, like you mentioned.
That's a really interesting skillful means point, Ajahn, with like preparing, and say you don't have the heart to just refuse someone asking, but if you've prepared something little, like, say you have a, small, some candy you can give to someone on the street if you've met your limit, like it's something, and similarly, recently someone was asking about, the situation with these sort of old relationships that were feeling not nourishing, but she didn't have the ability to kind of step away from them for various reasons. And I know you and I have both been in situations where, people are talking about, the latest Seahawks game or whatever. And as monks, we're just like, I don't know what to say, and to realize that it's not a cut and dry run away from that conversation or talk about the Seahawks, however they're doing. If someone knows, they can type it in. But that, if you found your way in one of those situations, there's ways of, it can really be a kind of interesting adventure to see if you can find the Dhamma in a conversation. If you're stuck there, why not make it worthwhile? And usually there's a way of asking a question and touching someone's Dhamma. And it's very interesting to try that, or to give gifts. So if you have those relationships in your lives, like how do you turn them into venues for growth, and how do you bring the Dhamma into them? And sometimes that can just mean like giving gifts to the people you care about, even though you can't really talk to them about your spiritual practice, like bringing them cookies or something. Or it can mean asking the relative who is intent on talking about politics and vaccine mandates or something, something very difficult to talk about, instead steering the conversation towards, their belief in God and what that means to them. I mean, you can find someone's heart. It just takes some skill and compassion.
Very true. And you can also practice once the conversation about God or the Seahawks has kind of reached its limit, you can also practice your getaway lines and be generous with yourself and go back to your
Do you have a
room.
good
And
one, Ajahn? A good getaway line, or
let's see. Gotta go. No, I don't have any at the
all
moment.
right.
But
Well, we could probably use one now to get to the questions if you think it's appropriate, or if you have
yeah,
something more to say, Ajahn, go for it.
let's switch to some questions.
I can read this one and you could answer it if you'd like, Ajahn.
Okay.
As my functioning has decreased due to aging and illness, I have discovered that I need to be more mindful of my priorities. Can you share reflections on developing a healthy balance of priorities? Oops.
Yeah. Knowing one's priorities is a huge aspect of Dhamma practice. In fact, the commentaries, I think, in a really helpful way, define they define heedfulness. So appamada, which is at one point the Buddha said that this is like all of his teachings can be subsumed under the rubric of heedfulness, appamada, and yeah, the commentaries define appamada is not relinquishing mindfulness regarding wholesome states. Yeah. So what that means is basically knowing your priorities. That's what heedfulness means. Heedfulness is knowing what your priorities are. And yeah, especially when our energies are dwindling. Yeah, whether that's, most people have an ebb and flow, in the day. Yeah, when you have higher energy or lower energy. But yeah, especially getting older, everybody's energy just dwindles, and that's when knowing your priorities really becomes even more important. And I think actually doing some writing, Tanisba, you talk a lot about this, is journaling and just taking time to really stack rank your priorities. Yeah. Is mindfulness, what is your governing principle? What's the governing principle for every moment of your life? That's a good question. That's like your primary priority in a sense. So yeah, developing a healthy balance of priorities. Well, you can think of it in terms of internal priorities and external priorities. And yeah, skillful means is developing lists of what those are for you, and really recollecting them on a regular basis, and really recollecting them, writing them down, and reviewing this on a regular basis. Nisabho and I both do this for our priorities, have different forcing functions, which will make us reread or reconsider our priorities on a daily basis. So yeah, I think it's introspection. And yeah, do you have any thoughts about the balance, Tanisabho?
You've been very helpful for me on this, Ajahn. We both used space memorization, which is where we every day review suttas and ones that have been especially meaningful. And when you have the Buddha's words kind of echoing through your head day in, day out, I mean, for example, just the Dhammapada verse Ajahn mentioned, he's memorized them all. And those really affect you, and they do affect your priorities, as do the friends you keep. I mean, this is the importance of skillful friendship. But I'm also struck by, when people came to the monastery and couldn't decide whether to say ordain or not, or go back or stay. What my teacher, Ajahn Anan, would tell them was to contemplate death, take that as your main object. And that was his main object for 4 years of his first time in monastic life. And if you want to figure out what your priorities are, really recollect that you don't know how long you have. It could be just a few days. It could not be even farther than the next breath. And then things get very clear. And I think, I remembered this story of this professor who he had like a bowl of like sand, rocks, and gravel, and then a jar. And first he put the sand in, then the gravel, then the large rocks, and the large rocks wouldn't fit. But then he took the large rocks, put them in, put the gravel in, and they sort of sifted down through the large rocks, and then the sand in, and it sifted down through all the others, and it all fit. The point being that you need to set your biggest priorities first, and then everything else in your life will sort of move around those. But if you don't know what your priorities are right off the get-go, then you can expect that things will fill up with a bunch of stuff that doesn't matter. So yeah, really listing it out and being systematic and stubborn. Be stubborn around your practice. People are not going to understand. You're a little bit crazy if you're doing this, and yet you're unbelievably sane. The world is crazy, but it's against the stream, so yeah.
Can I read you a question, Nisabho?
You can, and we should also get to the one sent earlier as well.
Maybe this one to you, and then you can read out that next one.
Great.
Okay, so interruption of daily practice routines causes aversion that I think of as arising from my preferences. So I feel I should let go. Thoughts?
Yeah, this is the subject of the whole talk, and not to say this question isn't completely still relevant. Like I said, this is just something that we both work with. My sense is it's just something that you have to give real value to that time alone. Like your daily practice routines are really important, and you should be somewhat stubborn around them, and yet especially if you just aren't able to keep any mindfulness, and then you can recollect that even if you think you should give your time to these people, you're not really giving much of value. You don't have your own center. So there's a real case to be made for retreating. That being said, this is just something I think, you sort of have to follow your own internal compass on. There's no fast and dry arithmetic. But aversion is never, a skillful means or a skillful state to cultivate. So I'd say, when someone demands your time, see what seems appropriate. If you're able to disengage in a skillful way and it's a skillful thing to do, then do so. But if you can't do that without causing more kind of knots and discord, then you need to feel that out too. And you can usually feel if you're sort of causing some dukkha that doesn't need to be there, and yeah, being patient endurance is the highest practice. So yeah, it's but no, this is a perennial tension of practitioners. But I think the really important thing is, to recollect death, to make clear your priorities, and to acknowledge that most of the world will try to pull you away from that. So you always have to be weighing those two things. Here, I'm on screen, but acknowledge that usually we don't give enough weight to time alone, just because the world doesn't encourage that. And you have to stack a bunch of things on there and be very conscious of realizing that this is important. And only then can you kind of get the proper balance, I'd say.
Yeah. So Nisabho and I are both advocates for the introverts out there. Don't be fooled by all the extrovert gaslighting, which goes on trying to make you think that you're being selfish for just taking the time you need to take to give priority to the things which are important for you.
Ajahn, I have a question for you. Okay. So we had this one sent earlier. It's on the Anapanasati Sutta, the Mindfulness of Breathing Sutta, and the questioner wanted to know what the distinction is between the 4 steps of the final Tetrad. There's 16 steps in the sutta, and the final steps are: 1, breathes in and out, contemplating impermanence; breathes in and out, contemplating dispassion; breathes in and out, contemplating cessation; and breathes in and out, contemplating relinquishment. So, Ajahn, what are your contemplations or thoughts?
Yeah, there are some people who feel that each of those 16 steps, the 16 steps, are actually a gradation. So the mind is getting more and more subtle. And I think there's actually a good argument to be made for that each of these steps is to some extent pointing at a more subtle level of mind. Like earlier in these 16 steps, we got lists of you're paying attention to rapture and pleasure, which go away with increasing, as you get to a higher levels of jhana. So under that interpretation, these are pointing to more and more refined levels of insight and even awakening. I mean, anicca. Well, viraga and nirodha are this second one. So that's dispassion and cessation. And both of those are they're synonymous with nibbana in certain contexts. So that's one way of looking at it. But another way of looking at it is that you can practice any of these 16 steps at any time. You don't have to wait till you're in the fourth jhana or above before you start contemplating impermanence. I mean, that's the easiest one to see. But the other ones as well. I mean, you can contemplate patinissagga, which is letting go in the present moment, when you let go of your attachments. And I think it's important to get a sense for the subtle distinctions of dispassion, like what the letting go of dispassion feels like in the mind, and what the letting go of cessation, like when things come to a stop, and the letting go, what that type of release, in my mind and in my practice, not on the deepest levels, but these do have different nuances, and I think each one can be helpful, and you can really play around with the words, find synonyms which work for you. I mean, dispassion and cessation might not float your boat. So finding something which is more meaningful for you that you can connect with is always helpful. Do you have any? And well, just on the topic of how these relate to practicing breath meditation, one really useful technique or perception is foregrounding. So this is where, with the first steps of the 16 steps, you're foregrounding the breath and other things are in the background. But with these latter steps, you're foregrounding dispassion, cessation, anicca, impermanence, and letting go. And then the breath is in the background. So you're still knowing the breath. I can still know that I'm breathing, but the main thing that I'm paying attention to is impermanence. So that's another way. Our time is closing up. I apologize. Do you want to say anything about that, Nisabho?
Sure, but Ajahn, if you want to duck out into the Zoom session, you can, and I'll just finish up here. Is that
sure?
Good?
Good idea. Yep.
So thank you, Ajahn, for joining us, and all those who want to, well, I'll say in a second, but good luck, Ajahn. Anumodana. It's good talking. So, briefly, I think just my own reflection on that would be that the 4 steps at the end of the Anapanasati Sutta, I've heard them compared by Bhante and Alio to contemplating impermanence is as if you're facing a freeway and watching the cars pass, enter and leave. So a mind state arises and then ceases. Contemplating dispassion, which is the next, is like you're turning your head to see just their passing away. Or sorry, you're turning your head towards their sort of passing. And contemplating cessation is just, that's when your head is already turned, so all you're seeing is out of the corner of your eye, the cars passing and disappearing again and again. So that's when you remain focused on the ceasing of the state. So frequently we miss the disappearance of the state and just become intoxicated with the arising. It's much more exciting. And viraga, dispassion, literally means we, not raga, color. And the Buddha, or I've heard it compared to sort of how a plastic toy loses its color in the sun. And then the final thing of contemplating relinquishment is just as your head is turned, watching those cars fade one after the other, then it's you just cease to become as infatuated because you finally are balancing your perception with their disappearance, whereas you've formerly been so infatuated with their arising. So I think that's a useful reflection. I think with the calm sort of cultivated with the first 12 steps, then you can use that contemplation on all mind states and all phenomena, and it is effective because the calm mind is very powerful and can see clearly. However, I've also really appreciated Ajahn Nisabho's interpretation, which is where he says that those 4 final steps are actually tools to be applied to every previous step in the sutta. So you say at the beginning of the sutta, the first step is to breathe in and out and know the breath as short or long and then short. Those are the first 2 steps. And you can see that as you move through the steps of the Anapanasati Sutta, the objects become more refined and more stable, less impermanent. So as you move up through those steps, the mind, as it becomes refined, just stops being attracted to the coarse nature of the earlier steps, of the earlier techniques, and begins to want something more refined and stable. So after you've been with the in and out of the breath, noting its length for those first 2 steps, eventually that's quite impermanent. It's very changeable. The next step of contemplating, of breathing in and out, aware of the whole body, is much more stable because you're aware of this sort of much more static field of experience. And in that case, you've contemplated the impermanence of the first meditation object. You've seen how you become dispassionate towards it, kind of cease to be infatuated with it or really attracted to it, because your mind is reaching for something higher and more stable. You've seen how it ceases. It's very impermanent and changeable. And then you've relinquished it for the sake of a more refined meditation object. So in this interpretation, those 4 final steps of contemplating impermanence, dispassion, cessation, and relinquishment are a litmus test or a metric you apply to every previous step on the sutta so that you can see when the mind is ready to lift to a higher plane of awareness, basically. And you can see this throughout the sutta as you move from tracking the breath to looking at the field of the body to tracking sort of a flow of subtle energy, piti, refreshment, to being aware of a static, bright field of sukha, pleasure. And yeah, it's helpful to have that metric because it helps you know when you're ready to let go of the lower rung of the ladder and lift yourself up to the higher. And then I think at the ultimate level, those 4 reflections can be used to liberate the heart, relinquishment of all things, as Ajahn Kovilo was saying. So thank you everyone for joining us, and it's great to have this online community. I think for those in Seattle, please feel free to join us at St. Mark's on Saturday. We'll be there as usual at 9:30. And now we'll go to our Zoom session, which is a chance for a more intimate kind of gathering and Q&A. The details of that Zoom link are on our website. Just scroll down to the events section, and there's a link. I'll also post the link here. And I believe that should post. There we go. All right, great. Good. See you all soon. And take care.